Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled, Visibility is the Key to Infrastructure Protection. My name is Lucy Buckley, and I'm the online event coordinator here at ISACA. We have a great presentation in store for you, thanks to our sponsor, Infoblox. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few quick tips. You have two audio options. One is to listen over your computer speakers. Two, you may dial in at any time using the numbers and codes listed to the left. Please note, if you dial in, there might be a slight delay as the slides advance. All ISACA members can receive 1 CPE credit for viewing today's webinar. If you are watching this event live, you must complete 3 checkpoints. Simply click OK on the pop-ups that appear on your screen. If you are watching the recorded version of this event, your progress is being tracked and you must watch from the beginning to the very end. After completing this webinar, you can receive your CPE certificate by visiting the transcripts page within your My Learning portal. Please remember that it will take 24 hours for the CPE credit to appear in your ISACA profile. We have made a job aid that goes over these steps in more detail. Click on the Papers tab to learn more or to download a PDF of today's presentation. Our speaker will be conducting a Q&A session towards the end of the event, so if at any point you have a question, please click on the Q&A tab. If at any time you need technical support, please access the Help tab. Finally, if you have any questions about the CPE submission process or suggestions regarding our webinar series, please visit support.isaca.org. And now, I'm very excited to be introducing our speaker for today, Sam Kumarsamy. Sam is currently working in security product marketing at Infoblox. He has 10-plus years of experience in marketing with Fortune 100 companies such as Cisco, Blue Coat, Citrix, Checkpoint, as well as VC-funded security startups. He has launched several disruptive products, services, and solutions globally, both directly to customers as well as through channels. Most recently, he was the global security marketing consultant at Cisco, helping in the integration and go-to-market plans and execution for security acquisitions such as Open, DNS, and LANCO. Sam has an MBA from W.P. Carley School of Business at Arizona State University and a BS in engineering from India. Now let's get started. Sam, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Lucy, for the great introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Kumarsamy, and today I'm going to be talking about visibility is the key to infrastructure protection. And here's my agenda. So I want to get started on what does infrastructure protection mean from an IT perspective, then talk about the visibility challenges within infrastructure protection, and then talk about the best practice solution for infrastructure protection. Why is that important? And then how Infoblox offers a solution that adheres to these best practices for infrastructure protection, and then we can talk about the next steps. So what does infrastructure protection mean? There are really 3 components to infrastructure protection. The first and foremost is talking about visibility across your entire infrastructure. And when I talk about infrastructure, I mean all devices, whether they're physical, virtual, in the cloud, that means public or private cloud. You need visibility because you need to know what you have in your network, right? And it's not just discovering through SNMP or ping, but it's actually also looking at the protocols, different elements within the network, protocol, VLANs, for example, the different segments. All that is important, and you got to be able to have visibility from a distributed perspective as well, not only local, but in different geographies too. And that is very, very critical component of infrastructure protection. The next component is really identifying once you do the discovery and the inventory, you need to know what devices are running old firmware, software, and so on, because you want to make sure that those that are non-compliant are compliant. Because again, when you have these rogue devices that have a different configuration, different change management, or different compliance, or not compliant with your organization's policies, they can be easily exploited by outside attackers, hackers, and so on, and that could lead to some serious damage in terms of loss of revenue, loss of business, downtime, and more importantly, loss of customers. And you certainly don't want that. The third component is actually protecting all the servers, switches, routers, all the different elements, including DNS, DHCP services. These are often the most ignored threat vector when you talk about DNS services. So the different VMs that you're spinning up, you want to make sure they're not prone to attacks, such as DDoS attacks or reflection amplification type of attacks that causes downtime. So you want protection against outside and internal attacks, specifically and more importantly, like DNS-based attacks. So let's double-click on some of the visibility challenges. Why is it so difficult to get the visibility or discover these network elements? First and foremost, many organizations have no knowledge of new devices if they're joining the network because they have a very manual inventory and discovery processes. Sometimes, believe it or not, even using spreadsheets or very siloed tools within the organization. For example, the network management team may not be talking to the security team. And that's a problem because each of them might have different discovery tools, and each, when they don't talk to each other, excuse me, the problem is that you do not have that open communication and that common inventory or database of all your single area of truth, for example, or single source of truth. The problem again is that will lead to a lot of confusion and very incorrect inventory and discovery of your entire extended infrastructure. And then it's very important to also identify any unmanaged that are not within your change management or configuration management devices that are roaming, for example, because today we know, you have so many mobile devices that includes your laptop, your smartphones. It's not easy to manage unless you have a policy or a discovery tool in place that can holistically discover all the elements of your network, including protocols, the VLAN, and network segments. And again, as I mentioned, there's no single source of truth. It's very hard. I've worked in many companies where even in Fortune 500 companies where they still have very siloed information about their inventory and discovery of assets. So, having one authoritative view of the network is always very challenging because you have to have a policy in mind and all the executives have to have a buy-in. And the bottom line is you really cannot protect what you cannot see. Again, that's where visibility is such a key to infrastructure protection. The other challenge is once you discover your different devices, all the physical, virtual, in the cloud, hybrid devices, the challenge is the network is always very complex. Like I mentioned, it is globally spread. You have on-prem, virtual, as well as cloud, both private, public cloud. You have SDN or software-defined networking. And it's really hard to get it's hard to get an inventory of those devices. And even if you do, it is very hard to identify any non-compliant devices unless you have policies for each of these different network elements. For example, you need to have a router policy, right? And that's very hard. You need to set that up. You need to apply it across the board, not just have the siloed configuration rules, because again, then each one is following their own rules. And then any insecure network devices that are not compliant, as I mentioned, not compliant with your policies, with your configuration or change management, again, is a big blind spot, is a huge blind spot because you cannot hear it at all. And you cannot view it, you cannot look at the configuration changes. And that's why it is so important to have these vulnerabilities, to be able to discover all these vulnerabilities. Then, in addition to, I talked about availability in terms of discovery of your network. Then I talked about vulnerabilities as well, the different devices that are not configured according to your organizational policies. The third challenge comes in availability challenges and associated impact. These are, for example, the external type of attacks, and especially prone, are your DNS servers. Your DNS servers are your DNS is the number one threat vector that is often ignored by many organizations. Why? Couple of statistics here, especially from Arbor Networks. One is that 81% of application layer attacks happens via DNS. And 94% of reflection and amplification attacks use DNS. See how important DNS is. And the problem is DNS affects your network availability. And the reason for that is if your DNS is down, your services, your network, and applications are unavailable. And how does that happen? Because of all types of external and internal DNS-based attacks such as DDoS, floods, exploits, and these can be volumetric attacks or specifically DNS exploit-based attacks, and they can bring the DNS down. And the problem is they can significantly, as I mentioned before, affect your service and application availability, right? And the recovery is often complex and labor-intensive. That's the problem. If your DNS is down, by the time you leverage all the people and recover, there are very severe costs associated to it. And then statistics provided by the Ponemon Institute have indicated that the per minute cost of downtime to a DNS attack is well over $500 per minute. Wow, that is pretty significant. And the average cost per year to deal with DNS attacks is about $1.5 million. So all this shows you the impact of having your DNS down. So it's very important to have that visibility into the attacks that are happening, especially on your DNS, because you don't want your services to become unavailable, which means loss of reputation, loss of revenue, and more importantly, loss of customers. Now, some best practices when we look at, here is a one version of it. It's called the SANS Critical Security Controls. And you can see there are about 20 security controls. What I've highlighted in orange here is, and if you start with the number one, for example, you can see how important the inventory of your authorized and unauthorized devices are. That's kind of the number one in terms of the best practices from a SANS critical security controls perspective. So again, that shows again the visibility into your inventory and discovery of your network or extended infrastructure devices are. The second here is the inventory of authorized and unauthorized software as well. So again, you can look at it as asset management, and also the secure configuration of hardware and software too is a very critical aspect of this security controls as defined by SANS. Now, I've highlighted in orange because to keep in the back of mind is this is what Infoblox provides. The company that I work for, they provide about 7 of these 20 controls. Again, I will not go into detail of what Infoblox does, but just from a security best practices perspective, I want you to understand that Infoblox tries to adhere to the security best practices as much as possible. Again, our focus area is on the infrastructure, DDI or DNS, DHCP, and IPAM infrastructure, along with the security products as well. But again, clearly I wanted to articulate here in this particular highlight is the fact that how important is visibility and configuration management, compliance management, and change management in infrastructure protection. So what is the best practices that the industry follows in infrastructure protection? So again, going through that one more time, but now we have 4 different components rather than 3 that I described before. The first is obviously from a visibility perspective, you do need to have visibility into your entire extended infrastructure, whether it's VMs spun out, physical, virtual, as well as in the cloud. You need visibility all the way down to the network elements, protocols, network segments, and so on. You also need visibility as much as possible into any attacks that are happening on your network devices or to your extended infrastructure. And this includes also OS and configuration vulnerabilities on your network, because again, you don't want authorized devices in your network, and you want to have visibility into that from a best practices perspective. You also want to detect, as I mentioned, any vulnerabilities and remediate them as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and as much as possible, as soon as possible. And the reason for that is you want to automate that process to not keep it manual, because manual, again, takes time, it uses a lot of labor, and it's not operationally efficient. So you want to automate the vulnerability management, configuration management, as well as compliance management as much as possible from a best practices perspective. DNS attack protection. As I mentioned, DNS is an important threat vector that is often ignored. So you want to protect your infrastructure against DNS-based external and internal attacks, all types of attacks, DDoS, amplification, reflection, hijacking, and so on. And you want to, in parallel, make sure while you detect and protect is to prevent any DNS-based service disruption. As I as I mentioned previously, DNS being down affects your business because your network becomes available, which means your applications and services become unavailable. You're unable to do business, loss of revenue, loss of customers, loss of reputation. You need to protect against DNS-based attacks as a best practice. The 4th component is data enrichment and ecosystem. So just be aware that no single vendor can solve all of your security problems. And I think most of you listening know that too, because typically a security infrastructure consists of several vendors, right? Because each one is specialized in one. There's always the challenge between, best of breed versus going with a single vendor. But it is suffice to say most organizations use the best of breed. And so it is always important when you have these security events, syslogs, alerts, and so on, to share that with your SEM. SEM stands for Security Information and Event Management. So you have vendors such as Splunk, QRadar, Oxite, and Logarithm, and so on, which are very popular and hold high market share in the SEM market. And almost all medium-sized to large organizations typically have a SEM where they use it as a central console to centrally analyze alerts, logs, and events. So it is important from an ecosystem perspective to share information through an API or application programming interface as a best practice with SEM and other ecosystem vendors. It could be next generation firewalls, vulnerability scanners, and so on. But that's a very important aspect from a best practice, is to be able to improve the security posture of your entire organization by sharing your specific information with other security vendors, because it is that is the rule today, because no single vendor can solve all of your security problems. Double-clicking on the visibility, as I mentioned, you need to be able to see every network asset, including every IP address and switch port with unmatched clarity. And the reason I say that is the single source of truth is so important, because you need to be able to consolidate all of that in an authoritative database. That's the best practice recommendation. You do not want siloed information where each department is doing their own thing. You need to be able to bridge those silos and have a common database for you to inventory and make business decisions, intelligent decisions from it, and manage your diverse devices as they come on or as you remove older devices from your network. You need to be able to release those ports and be operationally efficient, not just assign new ports to new devices without knowing that, hey, an older port or a previous port is available, right? So all that is part of the inventory and discovery, and why it is so important to manage all of that very efficiently under a single database. And typically, the best practice recommendation is to go with an IP address management kind of a database for you to sync that information, because you can have context from an end user perspective. Who did what, when did that change happen, when did that device switch IP addresses, or when did that device go off the network, when did the new device come into the network. And having a reporting mechanism to view all of that, either canned reports or customizable reports, to see that real change happening as you move or make changes to your network, add new devices. It is extremely important, and that's the best practice recommendation. And as I mentioned previously, the visibility aspect, double-clicking on that, it includes IP addresses, MAC addresses, host names, subnets, and VLAN information. So we're not just talking discovery from a high level, just ping or SNMP, but actually looking at in-depth information. When and where were the devices attached? User context, who had this IP address? Did the IP address change? Topology views, for example. Sync in with the IPAM database, IP address management. Remediate rogue and compromised devices, right? Devices that are not compliant with your policies. End hosts. And this all helps when you have this centralized information. And again, when you talk about this database information, it should be vendor agnostic based, so that you can look at wired and wireless devices, different vendors such as Cisco, look at software-defined networking, NSX type of information, visual networks, private cloud, hybrid, public cloud information. All that information, if you are able to collect from a best practices perspective, such as an IPAM database, it'll help in capacity management, asset management, and security compliance enforcement as well. So you can see how having the single source of truth for all this network context can help you make better decisions and improve your overall infrastructure protection. So that's why this kind of visibility from a single source of truth is so important to help you make better decisions from a best practices perspective. Vulnerability protection, right? Once you have all that visibility, you need to find those non-compliant devices and make sure, especially with vulnerabilities, right? They're not up to date on the latest software. They're not configured according to best practices or security policies. You need to be able to efficiently discover and analyze this particular and from a configuration perspective, change and configuration management, automating all of that with that IPAM database, also looking at it from a network analysis, because you're able to view all the configuration management information centrally and have the reporting capability, have that IPAM sync. You can remediate all those configuration or any errors through your reporting capability pretty fast, because you can look at it, you can view it, you can make those changes and automate all of that so that they're all compliant with your latest policies. And I think that is a very, very important aspect that you need to consider from a best practices perspective. Another important component of all of this is also, excuse me, lifecycle management. When I talk about lifecycle management, you're talking end of life, end of support status on your different network elements or network devices or devices in your extended infrastructure. So different vendors have their own information. So there are third-party tools that are available that can provide you that subscription-based information about end of life. And that is an important visibility you need to have, because you don't want to be going beyond a certain point on end of support or end of life of devices, especially your important network devices such as routers, switches, and so on. So having that information ahead of time so that you can make decisions on upgrading the hardware to the latest and the greatest, if needed, is important, because if you don't and you allow them to reach end of life, you are again opening yourself to all sorts of vulnerabilities as well. And that is so important to have. And vendors such as Cisco, Juniper, F5, and all that, they all provide this information to you, and it's always good to have visibility into that to stay ahead of errors and vulnerabilities that might happen. And the example here is just showing you some of the devices. For example, and I've used Infoblox here as an example that provides lifecycle management on 6 devices that have reached end of support and something you need to take a look at. It's kind of an alert letting you know, hey, you need to look at it, because once they reach beyond a certain point, these devices could become vulnerable unless you're upgrading them or making sure that you are aware of that as well to make important decisions. And again, having this information from multiple vendors, you can subscribe to them, and that's a best practice again to have all this as part of your visibility into your different types of end of life, end of support status as well. From a DNS attack protection, best practice recommends that you need to be automatically be able to protect against all sorts of DNS attacks against your DNS servers, both internal and external. And I already talked about the different types of attacks, anomalies, both volumetric as well as exploit-based. And the 3 things to take away from this is, while you are protecting your DNS servers from all these attacks, that's a best practice recommendation, is also in parallel, you should be able to reduce the DNS service disruption. I think an ideal solution or a best practice would be to maintain the DNS service without any disruption. That would be the best practice. And then all these rules and signatures that you have, they should be updated in near real time as possible, if not in real time. And some sort of a cloud-based update is always recommended to keep up to date on the latest threats that are emanating both externally and internally. And this is kind of updating the signatures as well as your rule sets that you set for these different attacks, and how do you define severity versus a normal attack versus a critical attack, and so on. And then having the reporting capability to have visibility into the attack patterns as well as the sources of attacks is another best practice as part of DNS attack protection. And these are, again, best practices for everyone to follow as well. Moving on, some of the reporting capabilities that I talked about in best practices for DNS protection helps you monitor, analyze, and secure your network devices and applications, because you are looking at how your DNS is facing up to the different types of attacks. You can look at the source and patterns, as I said. So this can be historical information, say like 24 hours old, or in near real time as well, because there are some reporting capabilities from a best practices perspective that can provide you updates every 30 minutes or 15 minutes or so. And you can get attack details by the different categories based on the different rule sets that you have created, or the different members within the different users. That is, basically, that's what I mean by members, severity, and time as well. And these are all, again, best practices for you to take a look at, time-bound, severity, the type of different rules, and the visibility into the source of attacks helps you better understand where the attacks are coming from and to take expedited remediation as well to make sure that they're not affecting your DNS or even affecting your network availability. And then early identification, this reporting helps in the early identification and isolation of issues for corrective action as well. So the last part I want to touch base with a couple of slides is, again, talking about that ecosystem and how important it is from a couple of integration perspective. One is the SEM integration, because SEM is something, as I mentioned, every organization uses. So while you think about infrastructure protection and you talk about, how you can enhance your Splunk or help, your SEM integration, Splunk being just an example, but any type of SEM vendor, be it ArcSight, QRadar from IBM, or Logarithm, it doesn't matter. Any of the SEM that you're currently using, to be able to pull in information about the DNS security events, as well as the IP address changes that are happening on the device. When did it happen? When, who? Gives you that network context information. So that is the richness that infrastructure protection type of information you can integrate with Splunk, because that will help Splunk quickly analyze the issue, because now you have the context of where these events are coming from and what devices are affected, what users are affected, what IP addresses are affected. That gives you that kind of intelligence and context for you to take action pretty quickly. And that's the integration or the ecosystem integration, obviously Splunk just being one of the samples. And the next slide, I'm actually going to show you how you can also integrate with the vulnerability management systems such as Qualys and Rapid7, for example. Again, this is just showing you some of the best practices for ecosystem integration when you can leverage the IPAM or DDI database information or the network infrastructure information, because by themselves, the vulnerability scans, scanning type of tools like Qualys and Rapid7, they're not as effective because they do not have the network context. However, as you can read on the right-hand side, the solutions such as Infoblox, for example, because we follow best practices, but it can mean any DDI vendor who can integrate with your vulnerability scanner and provide this type of context on your device discovery. And you can actually notify, because when a new device comes on the network and you as an organization are not sure if they're compliant, you can actually automatically alert the different vulnerability scanners to kick off a scan so that they can scan the device and make sure they're compliant and automate all of this. As soon as the device comes onto your network, you can kick off a scan, automate that process so that it can automatically scan and take remedial action. So again, providing that network context on which device that came on board, when did it come on board, who is the user, having that type of context, IP address, and so on, helps in quickly remediating the issues. And this is what I mean by that rich ecosystem integration actually helps automate and hasten the process of improving your security posture from an overall perspective. So I talked about all the best practices. So why should you look at Infoblox? So Infoblox is a DDI vendor with a proven track record. We are the market leader in DNS, DHCP, and IPAM space. Again, that's what we mean by DDI. And we have over 50% of the market share with 8,000 customers. And we are the only vendor who can protect against the widest range of external and internal DNS-based attacks. So I keep talking about how DNS is the most often ignored threat vector. We actually provide the widest protection against many type of DNS attacks. And we also provide the single source of truth with our authoritative IPAM database. Again, we're not saying we're the only vendor, but it's a vendor you may want to look at because we follow all the best practices, the industry best practices, and we are the only solution to provide the proactive network configuration analysis along with our discovery tool and the inventory tool, along with the integration into the ITAM database. So that provides you that rich, actionable network intelligence for you to make quick remediation of any types of threats or attacks on your infrastructure. Some of the next steps you can possibly follow is you can always visit our Infoblox website and download the free trials and software related to infrastructure protection. You can look up infrastructure protection on our website. You can also engage to discuss your visibility requirements, your follow-up sales team with our sales team for a deep dive on our products as well. So these are some of the next steps that you can take. And with that, I would like to open up for Q&A. So DNS stands for Domain Name System. One of the first questions that came up is, what does DNS stand for? DNS stands for Domain Name System. So it is a server that, when you type in like yahoo.com, it translates it into an IP address and allows you access to get to external sites. So that's DNS, or Domain Name System. The next question I have here is, the eternal problem is always how to actively discover devices and assets. Have you any advice on how to complete this within a large enterprise, or perhaps how to insulate against these? So devices and assets, and I don't want to, but one of the best practices we follow is we do have, and I can say from a best practices perspective, is to have an inventory tool or a discovery tool that looks up all the information that I talked about, not just doing an SNMP and ping sweep, but actually be able to discover the network elements as well. So you need a tool, and this is where to answer the person's question, take a look at Infoblox, for example. We follow best practices. We do have a discovery tool that's very comprehensive, and also a configuration management, compliance management, and a change management tool, all integrated into an IPAM database. So we are for the enterprise, and the solution can really help you do that discovery, configuration management, and actually even do the ecosystem integration as well. The next question is, how technical do you need to use this product? How is it applicable to small and medium-sized organizations? Not that, because the discovery is all automated. You do need to have some skills in network management. So a typical network engineer, network administrator, and I'm thinking when you say referring to the product is like Infoblox products, we are pretty much very user-friendly. It can be used by any network administrator. And again, as I mentioned, we also follow the industry best practices. So it's a tool that is very easy to use and easy to use, easy to understand, and it does a very comprehensive discovery, inventory, configuration management, change management, and policy management as well. The next question is, there are automated tools to enhance visibility. That's a question. Yes, as I just mentioned, there are automated tools to enhance visibility. I talked about, take a look at the Infoblox website. There are certain tools such as NetMRI, Network Insight. We have our DNS protection as well as our ecosystem integration. All this provides you with the visibility that you need to have a comprehensive view of your network infrastructure as well as extended infrastructure. Are these tools on-prem, cloud-based, or hybrid, or both? We have both on-prem and virtual solutions. So yeah, take a look, and then there are other tools as well. So it depends on your infrastructure. So you have various tools that address all of your needs, whether it's on-prem, virtual, or hybrid, or in the cloud. Why does Infoblox focus on DNS attacks? What about other application layer attacks? That's a good question. Infoblox focuses on DNS-based attacks specifically because that's in our DNS, or DNA, as I like to say, because DNS is something that, you know, our origins are in DDI, DNS, DHCP, and IPAM management. And so, you know, again, as I said, DNS is an often ignored threat vector. You have solutions for other type of traffic, such as web traffic and email traffic. DNS is, again, something that the attacks are kind of relatively new, even though they've been around for a while, but the focus on DNS has been relatively new. So that's why we feel there is a big need to add this additional layer for defense in-depth strategy, and that's why we specifically focus on DNS-based attacks. Do you offer security as a service for your offering? Yes, we do. Depends. So we do have both software as a service from a DNS, from a DDoS protection perspective. So our ADP can be downloaded as a software, or you can use it as a hardware appliance. So we offer both versions. And then there are other types of security services that we offer. One of them is for data protection and malware mitigation, and then that can be offered as a service only. Looking at questions here. Are these tools on-prem, cloud-based, or hybrid, or both? And I did mention that, you know, we provide all sorts of offerings. So the tools can be, it depends on your need, as I mentioned previously. So these tools can be on-prem, cloud-based, or hybrid, or both. You know, again, you have to look at the different solutions. The best practices recommend that these tools address all of that. Does Infoblox do a check on devices when a person tries to access the first time? Yes, we do that check. It's part of our inventory and sync up with IPAM management. We do provide that information. The next question is, can I also analyze data traffic if it is encrypted or not, and for example, not restricted database or repository? I will have to get back to you on that. So so the next question is, what are the leading tools in the market for network device discovery? I can recommend one for you. Infoblox's Network Insight is one tool that does a fantastic job of discovering in detail, in-depth network assets as well as network elements. It's called Network Insight. And then when you combine it with NetMRI, which does also configuration change and compliance management, you can look at vulnerabilities as well in the devices you discovered. So absolutely, that's NetMRI and Network Insight are the two tools that I would recommend. Slide 9, what do orange circles indicate? Those orange circles indicate that those are the areas that Infoblox can address from the SANS critical security controls best practices perspective. Here's another question. Which are the most effective tools to drive a full discovery of network elements? So I think I just answered that question. One of the best tools we recommend is Infoblox's Network Insight, as well as that is for inventory discovery and integrating into our IPAM database, that is IP Address Management Database. The other tool also I would recommend in addition to Network Insight is the configuration, change management, and compliance management tool called NetMRI. That's from Infoblox as well. Can it real-time feed a combo in ticket tooling such as ServiceNow? So that's a good question. I'm not sure. I will get back to you on that integration with ServiceNow, but I don't see why not. Just from an overall perspective, we should be able to integrate with ticketing tools, but I will get back to you on that. I'm not sure exactly if we integrate with ServiceNow or not. There are automated tools. So the question is, are there automated tools to enhance visibility? And I believe I answered that. Is Infoblox a CMDB according to ITIL? Not sure if we are ITIL compliant, but I know we are CMDB. So that's that I know for sure, but I can get back to you on that, whether we are according to ITIL, we are ITIL compliant or not. I also answered the question on how technical do you need to be to use the product? How is it applicable to small and medium-sized organizations? Yeah, it's actually available for organizations for all sizes. I believe I answered that, and also technically, a network administrator should be able to implement the tool and install it pretty easily because it is pretty simple to install. And I'm specifically talking about Infoblox tools such as Network Insight and NetMRI. Another question is, does Infoblox run real-time and detect possible attacks to any equipment connected to the network? So as I mentioned, the attacks we can prevent from a DNS perspective, attacks on DNS servers. We can definitely prevent that, which also means your DNS is the first layer of defense, which means we are protecting your network assets first in line. Obviously, from an email and web traffic perspective, you need other tools, but we are very specific on DNS-based attacks. So we can protect your DNS server against DDoS type of attacks, both external and internal type of attacks as well. And yes, it is in near real time because our updates are in near real time. Okay, there's another question. Does this product, so I don't know when you refer to does this product, I'm assuming you're talking about Infoblox product. Does this product work the way it has been described out of the box, or does it require considerable configuration once delivered? Example, a solution was purchased and what was delivered was an empty framework. The two choices were to use the internal people to read the manual and put the pieces together and hope it is done correctly, or pay a fee for the vendor to come in on board and do it for us. That really depends. If you have the in-house staff, you should be able to easily implement our solutions, the visibility and ADP. ADP, or the advanced DNS protection solution, requires you to have a certain benchmark to see the flow of traffic, and then determine, you have to define rule sets to define, what you consider as attack traffic coming in with regular DNS requests or queries. So that requires some work from, so you'll definitely need a network administrator. I don't think any of this requires you to hire professional services. It really depends how complex your network is. So that's my answer to you. There's no one fixed answer. If you have the in-house staff, your network folks, regular network administrators should be able to easily look at our products, and security administrators should be able to easily implement Infoblox products. So here's another question. How can the enterprise make it easy for all infrastructure to be visible in a silo environment? Well, that's the whole purpose. Is the best practice recommends that you put everything into an authoritative database, such as an IPAM database, which is, if you can implement that centrally, then that can include all the inventory discovery, especially using a tool like Infoblox NetMRI, especially if your infrastructure is Infoblox. are also third-party. We do collect multi-vendor equipment information. So putting it into an IPAM database helps you bridge those silos. I wouldn't say break silos because that is politically incorrect. We need to say we can bridge silos by putting all that information, inventory information, and tying it, for example, into an IPAM database or your DDI infrastructure. That can help you have that visibility into the network elements, any changes that are happening, all the way down to, as I mentioned, IP address, protocol information, user ID, changes to the IP address, and so on. Can you talk about some vulnerability scanning tools that can be used? Well, like I mentioned, the vulnerability scanning tools are Qualys and Rapid7. So those are typically the market leaders. Again, I'm not the authority on it because, I am with Infoblox, but we have integrated, like I said, from an ecosystem perspective, we have integrated with these systems. So I can say that, Qualys and Rapid7 are two vulnerability scanners that are very popular and widely used in enterprises. They're also some of the market leaders, and they work well integrating with our IPAM database and DDI information, where we can get a new device on our network and have it scanned to ensure compliance with our policies. In my organization, visibility and having access to the data is an issue. Any suggestion on how to improve? Start the discussions to help IT get comfortable with sharing the information. So that's a great question, right? So this is where, I think it is not just a tool that's going to help. You really need to have a discussion with, hopefully, if your team has a change management initiative, you should actually go and talk about it and see and tell them about the best practice. How important is it to bridge the silos and have visibility into all your network assets, be it whether it belongs to a security team, networking team, IT team, finance team, and so on, marketing team, for example. All of them have to be consolidated on a central database. I know it takes time. It's easier said than done. Talk is cheap. I think having a change management initiative and starting that discussion, having thought leadership, having a change management tiger team, and putting that and articulating the value of having all this visibility information in a central single source of truth database can help you solve all your problems much faster and improve the overall security posture of your company. That's how you want to start with from an executive perspective and not just talk politically about breaking down silos, right? You want to say, hey, this is going to be useful, helpful for all of us because it helps us drive operational efficiency as well as business decisions. I think we are reaching end of the hour there, Lucy. Do you want to wrap up?
Okay. Thank you, Sam, so much. Looks like we're just out of time today, so I'd like to thank Sam for that great presentation and interesting Q&A session. Also, a big thank you to our sponsor, Infoblox, whose support has made it possible for ISACA to offer this event free of charge to our constituents. Don't forget to check out the tabs at the top of your screen to view additional resources. This webinar was recorded, so you can go back and watch it from the on-demand program section in your classroom within your My Learning portal. Again, I'd like to thank Sam along with everyone in our live audience for your attention and participation. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Lucy.